host, and today my guest is Scott Smith. We're discussing our key topic today, which will be revolved around how to maximize athlete development in a congested schedule. So for those high performance coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, but also athletes tuning in, or even parents of athletes, to help support them and be able to recognize when they're dealing with not only physical fatigue, but also the cognitive load that goes with travel and playing multiple games in a week. But thank you for jumping on, Scott. We pass each other a fair bit during the week, but it's good to actually dive in and have a bit of a longer chat, mate. Looking forward to it.
No, thanks for having me on, Jack. Definitely looking forward to it. Listen to your podcast all the time, so it's nice to get a chance to jump on, that's for sure.
Good to know we have at least one listener. For those that aren't aware of your work, mate, do you want to provide us a bit of a background for how you got into the industry and some of the jobs that you've done? I know you've worked across a fair few A-League teams now, but yeah, for those new to your work, take us through a bit of a background.
Yeah, so I suppose most people that work in this industry, you start off coming through university, spent a lot of time doing internships. I started off, actually, my first internship was as a massage therapist at Sydney Hockey, as I was studying my sports science degree. And then obviously jumped into a couple of different sports from there, dabbled in a little bit of a rugby league, the rugby union, got a taste of different environments, different cultures. Although my end goal was always to end up at a football club or soccer club. It's a sport I loved and I followed growing up. So through my university at the University of Newcastle in Sydney there was an opportunity to join a club by the name of Newcastle Jets as their sort of youth team intern coach and assist with the sports science duties of the first team. And that's where I sort of got my first real taste of responsibility. And I absolutely loved it. Spent about 1.5 years, 2 years at that club. And then I moved to Western Sydney with their youth team. I was with the youth team for about a week. And then the conditioning coach there at the time, Adam Waterson, moved on to another job. And the head coach, Tony Popovich, who I actually work with now, I got called into their facility one day and basically had an impromptu interview for the role of the head of the first team. An interview I actually didn't know I was in. I didn't plan to be. He just asked me a few questions. I was around the club, and that was probably around 10 years ago now. And since then, I've been with the same head coach for 10 years and kind of moved from club to club. It's definitely interesting. You get settled in a state, or you get quite comfortable, or you're enjoying work, and the boss comes in and goes, "Righto, Scott, we're moving to the next project. You want to come?" And you can't say no, so you move on. And that sort of led me to Melbourne Victory.
What a sliding door moment. You must have made a bit of an impact in that interview, mate.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I can't remember too much of what went on there. I thought it was just a general conversation, and 24 hours later, I've got the uniform on and I'm getting started. So that process sort of happened from my first internship to that role. That was about a 3.5, 4-year process. So, I mean, took a long time to get there, but I'm grateful it took that long. It gave me a chance to really sort of learn, make a few mistakes, meet good people along the way. So once I got into that role, I had some good mentors to actually help guide me through, especially that first 12 months on the job.
Yeah, fantastic. Well done. That's amazing. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that off air, the fact you've been with Tony for a decade now, but it's interesting to hear the story behind how it all started. So you sort of referenced it a little bit before, but who have been some strong influences or mentors, if you like, that have helped shape your philosophy?
So yeah, early days, probably not so much of philosophy, but gave me a real insight into professional sport was Benjamin Dascombe. He was a lecturer of mine at the University of Newcastle, and he's very knowledgeable of what he does, but I liked him because he was brutally honest with everyone and basically said, if you don't knuckle down, you don't work hard, you don't put yourself out there, then don't chase this career path, because it's not easy. From probably more of a sports science, S&C, Carl Dodd was a massive mentor of mine early on. Craig Duncan, I spent a lot of time with at Western Sydney Wanderers as a sports science mentor, and he guided me very heavily on the GPS and analysing data. And it's not something you really learn too much at uni. I mean, you dabble in it, but the courses don't generally teach you the nitty gritty of it. And obviously the head coach here, Tony Popovich, spent a long time with him, got to know him well, but he definitely keeps me honest, keeps me on my toes. And I think that's important because when you stay the manager for so long, it can be very easy to become a bit of an echo chamber, become a bit of a yes man, or and then you don't add value. So he's constantly challenged me over the years to get better and challenge his thoughts and bring in fresh ideas. And if that doesn't happen, I wouldn't be here, and he wouldn't get better, he wouldn't succeed, and we wouldn't have the program we have today.
Yeah, yeah, that's yeah, some great people that have helped you along the way, and no doubt, yeah, helped you in terms of how you go about your craft. With those mentors and those people that you've went, like, how did you sort of forge those relationships for it to where you started to, like you said, be able to challenge each other, stretch each other, but then also support each other's work and be team colleagues?
Yeah, well, I suppose obviously Ben I covered with the university side of things, but I think Carl Dodd and Craig Duncan, Carl probably more from the practical side, Craig Duncan more from the sports science side. But those two guys, I think, gave me a lot of responsibility. They challenged me with that and basically said, you write the program, you create the program, you compile the report however you want. But when you get asked a question by us or somebody else, if you can't justify it, then you need to reflect and you need to ask why you're doing it. So whenever you write something on a piece of paper, or you give something to an athlete, or you're giving feedback to a coach, when they ask why, if you can't answer that question, then why are you putting it out there? So when I went through those initial years, they'd always give me the responsibility to write a program up or put together a drill or analyze a report. But then they'll come over the top and ask some hard questions. And I think that prepared me as well for working with athletes in general. Is they're going to ask questions, and if you're prepared, you can't be wrong, but you can always get better. So as long as you've got a reason and you're justifying why you're doing something, it doesn't mean it's probably the best practice when you reflect maybe a year or two later, but the decision you made at the time was with the right intentions. And I think that's how you grow.
Well said, mate. Nailed it. That's a gem straight off the bat. Love it. What about some common challenges that you faced talking about growth? High pressure. It's a high pressure environment, elite sport. What have been some ones that sort of spring front of mind, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I think we were speaking about it off air a little bit, actually. I think the first biggest challenge is working in Australian soccer. You work with a very small team of people. I mean, in my role now at Melbourne Victory, I'm lucky we've got one or two people around me, Jaden, our rehab coach, and Justin Pro, who sort of oversees the club sort of high performance space. You got shoulders to sort of bump ideas with. And but I think working in the A League, you're generally on your own. I mean, a lot of the roles I've had, I'm the conditioning coach, I'm the sports scientist, I'm the rehab coach, I'm the recovery coach, I'm the match day coach, and you're so busy, you don't really get a chance to sort of branch out and chat to other people outside of your sort of silo. It's very difficult to probably do things as well as you want to do it. So you really got to focus on the basics. So I suppose that's a challenge in itself, but it's also got a lot of benefits to it because you sort of reach out and you learn a lot of different skills. And definitely dealing with congested schedules, which we'll talk about a bit later, I'm sure, but working in an environment where there's a lot of travel, a lot of international travel, and you can be playing every 3 or 4 days. And you can read as much as you want, but until you're in it, you don't actually realise the effects it can have.
Yeah. And what about highlights on the flip side? Moments that you're sort of proud of?
Oh, yeah, highlights definitely probably the first job I got in sport that I got some money in the bank.
Starting to pay now.
That was really nice. Yeah. After 3.5 or 4 years, when I suppose you question yourself a lot, am I going down the right path? It's a grind, not getting paid or not getting paid much. So that was definitely a highlight. And definitely living in different cities, working with different people, creating new cultures. I mean, every time you seem to move somewhere new or start a new year, it's exciting. So I've always enjoyed that. And they've definitely been big highlights.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, you touched on it before. Let's dive straight into it. Managing condensed schedules, overload, but also with the focus of trying to still develop the athletes from an athletic point of view and get load through them. What are sort of the common signs that you sort of recognise when an athlete might be on the edge, and you're facing a condensed schedule in season?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to answer just on its own, I suppose. If we use an example, one of our condensed schedules, say when we're playing in the Asian Champions League, we've got a cup and we've got the sort of A-League. There's scenarios where we could be playing in Perth on a Sunday. Then your next game you're playing on a Wednesday in Tokyo.
Yep.
And then you're flying back to play in Brisbane on Saturday, and then that repeats again. You're off to Korea on the Wednesday, you're back in Melbourne or Sydney on the Saturday. So from a performance point of view, that's definitely got its challenges, probably more mental than anything, because you can go through with the athletes 3 or 4 weeks at a time where you actually don't have a day off and they're constantly thinking football. So psychology is a big part. Really understanding the athletes from a personal level and distinguishing when is muscle soreness actually just muscle soreness, or when it is when is it a little bit more than that. And when you're traveling and you're living with each other constantly, I think it's really important to understand your athlete and understand when the warning signs you really have to take notice of, or maybe you understand that athlete maybe puts it on a little bit more than others, and you look at it in a little bit of a different way. So first and foremost, I think it's just the psychology of dealing with the athletes and understanding them before you take that next step.
Yeah, well said, mate. Reading the room and like you said, the importance of understanding your athletes, and those no days off. I can imagine from a coach's point of view as well, there must be some challenging times where your energy starts to drop. How do you sort of bring energy to the gym? And it's definitely something I've noticed. Going past you seem to always have it in your voice when you've got the coach's hat on. But is that something that just comes naturally, even during those more challenging blocks with travel and everything else, or do you have sort of a preparation and a mindset going into each session?
I think, yeah, good question. I think my personality is generally quite like that. I'm pretty social and I like to have a bit of an energy about me, but I've definitely learnt that along the way. I think the first 1 or 2 years in the environment, particularly when you're going through a lot of that travel and a lot of that sort of congested schedule, I didn't know how to switch off. So on a 10-hour flight, I'd be reading, I'd be podcasts. When you did get a day off, I'd be spending half my day thinking about the next day. But I think over time I've learned, if you get half a day off, if you get a day off, or if you get a flight for a few hours and nothing's urgent, actually enjoy that time to yourself and refresh. Because yeah, as hard as you try, sometimes you can't always hide how tired you are, or how how low you might be in terms of energy wise. So I've learned to manage that a lot better over the years, that's for sure.
Yeah. And from a balancing act, when you are designing your programs and you've got a condensed schedule coming up, perhaps in the next training block, do you have key focuses from a speed, acceleration, power point of view? Is it a little bit of everything? Talk us through sort of your mindset when you're programming and you've got a condensed schedule coming up.
Yeah. So firstly, I suppose my first 40 is okay. The boys that are playing quite regularly, if they're starting games regularly, if they're at least coming off the bench, they're probably the least of the worries, because they're getting a decent dose of training load through games. On a Saturday, on a Wednesday, on a Sunday, they're going to be sprinting, they're going to be running, they're going to be sort of challenging themselves from a physiological point of view. It's probably more staying across the boys that aren't getting many minutes, or maybe traveling a lot and not getting on the pitch at all. Making sure that we're at some point in the week, we're getting a little bit of load into them. We're getting a little bit of high speed running. We're getting some sprint distance in at the right moment. particularly in those moments when we might be playing back-to-back home games, and there's no trouble. He's really trying to nut down and focus on the players that aren't getting a lot of load or match minutes in. I think that's where I really focus a lot of my attention. Knowing that the boys who are playing a lot of minutes are really getting that stimulus anyway. So it's more just getting their recovery, making sure that they're fit and ready to go for the next game. But it's the other boys who we really need to get that into.
And I guess for those listening that work in the AFL, there's a similar aspect for the players playing sub that might only play a quarter. Would you do majority of their main training sessions straight after that game when you know the minutes they haven't played, or is it in training during the week? How do you sort of juggle the fact that the unknown of an injury might happen to a star player, and now suddenly a player that's on the bench is playing a full 80 minutes of football? How do you sort of adjust that with that fluctuation of week after week?
Yeah, I think I've dabbled with a couple of different sort of models. We have worked on a few years ago where immediately after the game we would train or run players on the field. I've kind of gone away from that a little bit because we used to get, whether we were overseas or we were in Australia, we used to get a bit of time on field, whether that was a 20 or 30-minute window to train our players. I think that's changed a lot now with the amount of traffic that are on stadiums, with a lot of the double headers, the women's game obviously growing. So they might give you a little 5-minute window. So I don't do any training immediately after a game. But the next morning, we're always on field. Boys who didn't play minutes, who are on the bench, we make sure that we always, home or away, we get a good proper training session in. So if we're in the middle of Tokyo, we've already pre-arranged a training session at a stadium the next morning. The other boys might continue their sleep in. They might be doing some recovery late in the afternoon, but in the morning, we take all the boys out who need to train and make sure we get a good proper dose of training into them the day after a game, and everyone kind of stays on the same schedule.
And is that next day sessions like 80% of a typical game for that player for their high speed and sprint, or is it the same as a game? Is it more? How do you sort of plan it?
Yeah, with the congested schedule, probably not so much the amount of volume that they do in reference to the game. It's probably all about intensity, getting their sprint distance in, their max speed, getting some good high speed volume. So on occasions, that might only be a 2 or 2.5K session, but you're getting a good 1.5K of high speed running. You might be getting 90% of their max speed, just trying to hit those max velocity doses. And then we'll get them off feet and we'll do a little bit in the gym, whether that's strength work or whether it's some off feet conditioning work, just to pull back a little bit on the amount of running load that they've got to do day after day after day. Because in football, I'm not sure on the other sports, to be fair, but players who are on the bench who don't make it onto the park, across that 95 minutes, or if you're playing 120 minutes in Asia, if you're playing extra time, they can be doing up to 6 to 6.5 kilometers of running just in a warm up throughout a game.
Yeah.
So while the game's going on, some of them are getting some good load in too. So you've got to take that into consideration. It's not necessarily a day off from playing because they're still actually running. They've got the emotion that comes with it. They're accelerating, they're decelerating. So all of that gets factored into the next day as well. So our focus is high intensity.
And that's balls involved? There's like some soccer drills and...
always try to get a little bit of the ball involved. But again, it depends on where we're traveling. Is it back-to-back away games? Sometimes it's just, what, boys, keep your shoes on. There's no ball involved today. We're running. So particularly after some long-haul flights, if you're going from Perth to Tokyo, for example, that's at least 10 hours. Then you're on a bus. Then you're constantly on a bus to go to training. Then you play. Then the next day after training, you're back on a plane. So sometimes we take the ball out of it because you don't want to risk them trying to hit a long ball or hit a shot at goal, even if they're just mucking around and they ping a quad. So sometimes you have to pull them back and, boys, we're just preparing you to be ready to play. But sorry, lads, you're not using a ball today.
That's interesting, and thanks for sort of sharing how the philosophy's changed from straight after the game to then the next day. With the context you provide, it makes a lot of sense. What about the time that the athletes and staff are spent traveling? Is that Do the coaches and staff use that for meetings and education? Is it used just to let the athletes switch off? Talk us through that sort of balance.
Yeah, probably for the athletes, we use that time for them to actually switch off. 'Cause a lot of the time that ends up being their day off. I mean, again, if I use an example from a time in Sydney, we played a game in Sydney one night. We finished at 10 o'clock at night, and then we pack up and we had to go straight to the airport to catch a flight to go to Korea. The Asian Champions League rules require teams to be in the host country 3 days before kickoff. So sometimes you had to actually get straight on the plane. So that time for the athletes was more spent time to themselves, make sure that they eat well, recover well, and if we're flying overnight, try and help them or encourage them to sleep. Coaches will use a little bit of it to obviously analyze the game that's just gone or the game coming up, but a lot of us do try and just treat that as downtime, because essentially those 10 hours on a plane plus the transit, that's our day off. And then once we're back at the hotel, then bang, we're straight into it again. So it's a little bit more downtime.
And on the flip side, from a performance point of view, when you're noticing that the schedule or just the general load on the players with travel and everything that's going on, and they're a bit down on the day before a game, what are some strategies that you've found effective to sort of get the group up and get them buzzing and priming them before, going into a important game?
Yeah. Now, I mean, from our point of view, straight away, we try and keep the schedule as normal as possible. I think when you're on the East Coast and you're flying north, to south or south to north, you're not really impacted by jet lag, because the time in Tokyo compared to Sydney, for example, is very much the same. When you're going east to west or west to east, then you're impacted by jet lag. So we have to try and manage that a little bit differently. But in terms of the psychology of things, or trying to get them sort of up for a game, we sort of rely heavily on our leadership groups to do that as well, and try to give them time on away trips to have, time to themselves, time with the group. Do the group want to go out to dinner together? Do they want to have a bit of a, table tennis competition? Like, what can we help them with? What can we provide as a club to help them switch off and not think about football? Because again, when you're traveling constantly, you're thinking about the next game, and that's all you're hearing about, because you're around a bunch of football guys, a bunch of sport guys going to the next game. So trying to work with the leadership group, and that really comes from the head coach as well, is what can we help you guys with to keep your minds away from football? What can we sort of pre-plan, and what can we help you guys as leaders to help the boys switch off from football and generally just enjoy each other's company? So particularly the boys that have families and they might not see them for 2 weeks. You guys have all experienced that during COVID as well, during AFL. Like, it can get difficult when you're on the road. So, just trying to help them switch off in other ways as well.
Yeah, and for the younger developing athletes listening in, or parents of younger athletes, what are some general tips that you found quite helpful for more your junior athletes that are looking, that maybe they're a bit low in motivation in the middle of the season, they're in a bit of a form slump and they're trying to bounce out of that?
Again, it's a difficult question because everyone's a little bit different, but I think set goals and don't put too much pressure on yourself. Set small goals. If you're out of a team for whatever reason, if you're not performing too well, try and strip that back and probably set goals that you can probably achieve. Set goals that are within your limits, that are within your strengths. Peel that back, start from there, and work forward. If you try to overanalyze too much, you can really dig yourself into a bit of a dark rabbit hole.
Yep.
So, but with experience, I think we all learn how to deal with that a little bit differently. But when you're young, I think you can probably overthink it a little bit too much, whether that's in the gym or whether that's your sport in general. I think don't overthink it and set goals.
And we've talked about the preparation side of things. What's your take on recovery? Have you got favourite methods? Is it an individual based with the athletes and sort of getting them to drive it? Or is it more the group's got a certain amount of recovery that they need to do? Talk us through, your philosophy with recovery, I guess, straight after the game and then early in the week.
Yeah, I think I've developed the way I go about that over the years. I think early on I was very by the textbook. got to do this for this long, jump in the ice bath here, get on the bike, down this protein within the first, 15, 20 minutes and we're quite regimented with how we did things. But I think with experience, I think I've learned you need to provide the group with as many different options as possible, and then allow them to choose what they do and when they do it. So I think the two non-negotiables for me are ensuring that food's available, so that they have to eat or get some type of supplementation in immediately after a game. And I think where we can is try and provide them an environment where they can actually sleep, have a good sleep and sleep in, and not get them up too early to do things that they don't need to be doing. So food and sleep are probably my two non-negotiables, but they're kind of easy to implement because, let's face it, everyone likes food and everyone likes to sleep. But in terms of the other recovery methods, I think just having them available, I think you can't go wrong with that, because every athlete's got a preference. I mean, I remember when I was first coming through, actually, and you're trying to force boys to jump in an ice bath that absolutely hate the ice bath. And I think we've all dealt with boys like that. You just create more stress and you create more conflict, and it becomes a chore. So I think by making that available but not forcing it upon the players, I think over the years and with my experience, I think it just works a lot better. Create options, let them know that it's there, educate them, then it's your decision.
Yeah, I love that. No, touched on the big rocks of sleep and nutrition and how important the influence we can have on the environment. It's some really good ones for coaches to understand, perhaps those just starting out as well. The authoritarian approach doesn't always work the best for everyone.
Yeah. You learn that pretty 100%.
Quickly. What about from an industry point of view, mate? Where do you see sort of the industry going in the next 5 years? It seems like you're pretty hungry to constantly work on your craft. And like you mentioned yourself and the head coach, Tony, are constantly challenging each other to get better. Where do you sort of see the largest growth in areas in high performance sport over the next sort of 5 years?
Yeah, another good question. To be fair, I haven't really thought too much
Just
about
think about
that.
tomorrow, yeah.
I think, yeah, think about tomorrow, but I think again over time, and I'm still learning, obviously, like we all do every single day. But I think as the years go on, I think you always realise, and the new research or whatever comes back, or the people you talk to, you can't go past doing the basics. No matter where the industry goes, where the research goes, what algorithms people come up with or we come up with as a profession, I think nothing beats doing the basics well. So I think the industry will just keep going around and around in circles, coming back to do the basics well first. And obviously, as technology grows and people a lot smarter than me are doing all that research, there's going to be little bits and pieces that come out of it. But yeah, I think just understanding basics work, I think that'll never change.
Yeah, I love it. We've discussed a fair bit in terms of maximising athlete development during challenging schedules and a congested schedule that involves travel, both interstate as well as international. Is there anything that you'd like to touch on that we haven't potentially discussed before we wrap it up?
Off the top of my head, mate, no. I think you see, I work quite simply. I work quite basic. So when you're in those scenarios, I think get the basics right first. No matter how congested your schedule is, no matter what little time you have to train, get those basics in, and then the rest kind of takes care of itself if you're kind of professional away from the sport and you're doing everything right.
Very good. Well said. Moving into the personal side, mate, do you have pet peeves from an industry point of view? Anything that makes you angry or fires you up?
Oh, I've tried to get better than this, but lateness. I hate people being late for anything, including myself.
Is there a penalty? Is there a penalty there for the players that rock up to a gym session late, or?
They just know about it. I'll make sure they know about it for at least a week on end. So, yeah, and taking shortcuts. I think anyone trying to take shortcuts kind of gets me a little bit, because sort of that's the easy way out. And they always come back around to realizing that working hard and being consistent that doesn't change. So they're probably little pet peeves. Probably not something I absolutely get angry at, but little pet peeves.
Yeah, the ticker. They're good ones. What
Yeah.
about favorite way to spend your day off? Sounds like you're pretty busy. There's probably few and far between,
Oh,
but if you get one, what do you
mate,
like to do?
mate, day off, get the phone away, and just get outdoors. Whether it's a good hike, good run, going for some good coffees, good feed. Just get away from the phone, put it away from a few hours, and get outdoors. It's been harder in Melbourne because you can't pick the weather. So
That's very
go
true.
outdoors. Yeah, I've only been here 2 years, and mate, I still can't pick it. But yeah, just get outdoors, mate. Go find a good coffee, and just stay off the phone.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I've lived here my whole life and still don't think I'll ever get it. No one will with Melbourne. It gets more crazy each year goes by. But
Yeah.
what about what's on the horizon? We're sort of recording this in April, so we're getting close to halfway through 2023. What's on the horizon for you that you're pumped about? You're excited for this year?
Oh, look, I mean, the fact that I've worked the same head coach for 10 years, I can't plan too far ahead from where I'm going to be and when I'm going to be, kind of thing. But I think just you know the next challenge. Hopefully, obviously, I've got ambitions to go overseas as well in this sport and challenge myself in a different culture. I've had an opportunity in Greece for a little while to work over there and absolutely loved it. Um, so yeah, obviously to try and keep getting better. I've really enjoyed my time in Melbourne, particularly at Amy Park. I mean, working alongside you guys at the Demons, working with the Melbourne Storm here, seeing a lot of professionals that you generally don't get to spend a lot of time with. So in the short term, while I'm here, I'm really enjoying that, seeing different sports work. Having worked in a little bubble for a little bit of time, I've really enjoyed that. But yeah, take it day by day. And we haven't had the best season on the park in terms of results this year, but looking forward to next year and flipping that script and getting back to winning ways and really enjoying it.
Yeah, no doubt. You'll bounce back into the finals, yeah, very soon. So, yeah, really appreciate you jumping on, mate, and sharing with us your experiences over the last decade in elite sport, both how you've evolved as a practitioner, but also what's worked. And we believe that success leaves clues. And yeah, thanks for sharing with us some stories and insights in how you go about your craft. So, thoroughly appreciate it, mate. For those who got any follow-up questions for you, is there a good place to get in contact in terms of socials?
Well, yeah, I don't have social media, so if they want to get in contact, they can probably come through you, and you can pass them on my
I'll pass them
details.
on.
So yeah, no
Yeah,
problem.
easy. Yeah, you can send it through anywhere, and I'll happily pass them on, guys. And I'll hit up Scott next time I see him and relay the information. But yeah, thanks again, mate, and yeah, really looking forward to seeing what the rest of the year brings. And for those that have tuned in halfway through, this will live on our YouTube channel. So from now till next week, before we publish the podcast on Wednesday, you can listen to the whole episode there. We didn't muck around. We dove straight into the good stuff. So make sure to listen to the very start. And our next live interview is with Phil Morland. That'll be Thursday, the 4th of May at 1 p.m. Australian Standard Time. I'll see you guys then. Thanks again, Scott.